She leaned in and whispered, "Stay close. Don't speak." Ethan had never expected his first assignment as part of the Earth Exploration Corps to be anything like this. He'd been trained for it, sure, trained to explore, to study, to learn about unknown worlds. But nothing in his training had prepared him for the strange, alien ruins they were currently stranded in. The mission had started like any other. They had arrived on a distant, war-torn planet to investigate unusual energy readings. The team's objective had been to map the area and gather data about the planet's atmospheric conditions. However, when their ship was struck by a mysterious energy pulse, they were forced to make an emergency landing in the heart of a forgotten city. Now, with their communications cut off and no way to call for help, they were stuck. The city was unlike anything Ethan had ever seen. The architecture was jagged and sharp, as if the structures were alive, growing rather than built. They looked ancient, centuries, maybe millennia old. The air was thick with a strange energy, as if the city itself held some kind of pulse. Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. As he moved through the ruins with his team, he kept his senses alert. His helmet filtered the toxic atmosphere, but he could still feel the weight of the place pressing down on him. His team leader, Lieutenant Harris, was barking orders, keeping the crew focused, but Ethan couldn't help feeling a growing unease. That's when he saw her. She stood at the entrance of a darkened hall, watching them intently. Tall and striking, with glowing markings across her skin, she seemed almost otherworldly. Her eyes, deep and dark, shimmered with a hidden intensity, and her hair, a shade of silver that seemed to reflect the strange light, fell in waves around her face. She was dressed in tattered but intricately designed clothing, a mix of flowing fabric and metallic elements that seemed to fuse perfectly with the city's ancient aesthetic. At first, Ethan thought she was another survivor, someone who had been stranded like them. But when she stepped forward, the air around her seemed to hum with a quiet, otherworldly power. There was something about her that made Ethan uneasy, like she was more than human, more than just a survivor. She wasn't just a woman, she was a presence, something ancient, something far beyond anything Ethan had ever encountered. She looked at him, her gaze steady and piercing, as if she was searching for something within him. And then, without warning, she spoke. "Stay close, don't speak." Her voice was soft but firm, like a command wrapped in a whisper. Ethan's heart raced as the words echoed in his mind. He wasn't sure why, but something about her tone made him want to obey. It wasn't fear exactly, but a strange instinct that told him this wasn't a request. It was an order. "Lieutenant, should we—" Ethan began, but the woman raised a hand, cutting him off. She moved closer to him, her presence suddenly overwhelming. The others in the group stayed back, unsure of what was happening, but Ethan couldn't look away from her. It wasn't just her beauty, though that was striking. It was her aura, this feeling of power, of ancient knowledge, as though she carried the weight of centuries on her shoulders. Her eyes never left his, and as she leaned in close to him, he felt an unspoken connection, something he couldn't explain. Her breath was warm against his ear, and she whispered once again, "Stay close, don't speak." Ethan nodded without thinking, his mouth going dry. He didn't know what was happening, but his body seemed to move on its own. He had always prided himself on being in control, but in that moment, in her presence, he felt as though he were nothing more than a puppet, tugged by invisible strings. The team began to gather their equipment, clearly uneasy with the situation, but Ethan could sense they were also intrigued. There was something about the woman that made them hesitate to question her. Ethan glanced back at Lieutenant Harris, who seemed to be evaluating the situation carefully. Harris was a seasoned officer, used to danger and unpredictability, but even he seemed uncertain about what to do next. "Ethan," Harris said, his voice low, "what's going on?" I'm not sure," Ethan replied, his voice barely above a whisper, "but I think we need to follow her." Harris gave him a sharp look, but Ethan's words seemed to settle in his mind. Despite his training, despite everything he knew about military protocol and survival, something told him this was no ordinary encounter. They had to follow her no matter what. The woman turned and started walking, her movements fluid and graceful, as if the ruins themselves parted to make way for her. Without thinking, Ethan found himself following her, the rest of the team trailing behind. As they walked deeper into the heart of the city, the silence around them grew heavy. The strange hum of the city seemed to pulse louder, as though the very walls were alive. They passed through towering structures that seemed to twist in impossible shapes, their surfaces covered in alien symbols that glowed faintly in the dim light. It felt like they were walking through a dream or a memory that had been buried for centuries. Ethan tried to focus, to gather his thoughts, but every step they took seemed to draw him further into the mystery of the place. The woman led them to an ancient archway, its surface covered in intricate carvings. She paused before it, turning to face them. Her eyes flickered briefly to Ethan, and then she spoke, her voice almost lost in the stillness of the ruins. "This is the threshold," she said, her tone flat, but there was a weight to her words. "Beyond it lies what you seek, but beware, it is not what it seems." Ethan didn't know how to respond. Her words were cryptic, but there was an undeniable sense of truth in them. She knew something that they didn't, something important. And yet, as much as he wanted to ask questions, he couldn't bring himself to speak. Her presence had a kind of control over him, a pull that made him want to remain silent, to just follow her lead. The woman stepped forward, raising her hand to touch the carvings on the archway. A soft blue light flared from the symbols as she whispered something under her breath, an alien language that sent a chill down Ethan's spine. The air around them seemed to vibrate with energy, and the archway slowly began to open, revealing a dark passage beyond. "Come," she urged, her voice now calm, almost reassuring. "We have much to do." Without another word, she entered the passage, disappearing into the darkness. Ethan hesitated for a moment, but something deep within him told him to follow. And so, without looking back, he stepped forward, his heart pounding as he entered the unknown. The rest of the team followed, though there was a visible reluctance in their movements. They had been trained for exploration, but none of them were prepared for the strange events unfolding before them. As they moved deeper into the passage, the walls began to change. The rough, ancient stone gave way to smooth, polished surfaces, and the air grew thick with a strange, metallic scent. The sound of their footsteps echoed in the narrow corridor, but the oppressive silence of the place made it feel as though the walls were closing in on them. Ethan's mind raced with questions. Who was this woman? What did she know about the city? And why had she singled him out? He couldn't shake the feeling that he was more than just a witness to this strange encounter. He was part of it somehow. But what role did he play in all of this? As they reached the end of the corridor, they emerged into a vast chamber, its ceiling lost in shadow. At the center of the room stood a large pedestal, covered in dust and ancient debris. The woman approached the pedestal, her movements slow and deliberate. She raised her hand, and a soft light began to pulse from the pedestal, casting an eerie glow across the room. "This is it," she said, her voice soft but filled with meaning. "The key to everything." Ethan stepped forward, drawn by the light. As he reached the pedestal, he could feel the energy radiating from it, a warmth that seemed to seep into his bones. The air crackled with power, and he knew, without a doubt, that whatever lay ahead would change everything. He turned to the woman, his voice barely a whisper. "What is it? What does it do?" She looked at him, her eyes unreadable. Then, without saying another word, she reached out and touched the pedestal, activating it. The room erupted in light. As the light from the pedestal flared, Ethan felt a sudden warmth fill the room, enveloping him in an almost tangible energy. It wasn't like the warmth from a fire or the sun. It was deeper, almost as if the light was coming from within him. He glanced around the chamber, but the surroundings had changed. The walls now seemed to shimmer with light, reflecting the pulse from the pedestal in strange, mesmerizing patterns. For a moment, everything felt still, silent. But then, like a sudden rush of wind, memories flooded Ethan's mind. They weren't his own memories, but they were vivid, far too vivid to be imagined. He saw flashes of strange alien landscapes, distant stars, and strange figures moving through dark hallways, their eyes glowing with the same energy that filled the room now. The images were fragmented, like a puzzle missing key pieces, but they were undeniable. The pedestal was showing him something beyond the ruins, beyond the city, beyond even the Draelic's woman who had led them here. He shook his head, trying to clear his thoughts, but the visions kept coming. It felt like he was drowning in them, unable to separate his own consciousness from the images that were being forced into his mind. He stumbled back, his breath coming faster as he tried to make sense of it all. What was happening? What was this thing? "Ethan," a soft voice said, and it was as if the world paused. It was Lyra, her tone calm but filled with urgency. "Do not fight it. The artifact is showing you the past. It's showing you what you need to understand." Ethan blinked rapidly, trying to focus on her. He could barely make out her figure through the haze of the visions swirling around him. She was still standing at the pedestal, her hand hovering above it, her eyes locked onto him. There was something almost soothing in her gaze, even though it was filled with ancient knowledge and power. He wanted to speak, to ask questions, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, the images around him began to coalesce. The fragmented scenes started to form a clearer picture, one of war. He saw vast battles, ships burning in the sky, and armies clashing on distant worlds. And at the heart of it all, he saw the Draelix, her people, fighting desperately against an enemy that was almost too powerful to comprehend. In the middle of the chaos, there was one image that stood out above the rest. A large structure, glowing with an intense blue light, standing tall amidst the destruction. The artifact. It was the source of both the Draelix's power and their greatest curse. It was not just a tool, it was their lifeline, the key to their survival. But at the same time, it was also what bound them, trapping them in an endless cycle of war and destruction. Ethan felt his pulse quicken as the vision focused on Lyra. She was no longer the woman he had seen when they first met, the mysterious guide who led them through the ruins. In the vision, she was standing at the heart of the battle, commanding forces with an intensity that sent a shiver down his spine. Her face was the same, but there was something different about her, a timelessness in her eyes that spoke of centuries of struggle, of sacrifice. You were there," Ethan whispered, his voice shaky. "You've seen all of this, you've lived through it." Lyra's face softened slightly, but there was no warmth in her expression. "I have," she said quietly. "I am the last of the Draelix Guardians. The artifact has kept me alive for centuries, but it has also kept me bound to this never-ending conflict. And now you are here." Ethan's mind raced. "Me? Why me?" "You were chosen," she answered, her voice steady. "The artifact chooses those who are worthy, the ones who can understand its power. You are the key, Ethan." He felt a chill run down his spine as he realized the weight of her words. He was just a scientist, a member of an exploration team. He had no business being part of something so monumental, and yet the artifact's light pulsed again, almost as if to confirm what she was saying. Lyra stepped toward him, her movements slow and deliberate, as if every step was part of a greater plan. "The Draelix were once a peaceful people, but our enemies, the Sharon Empire, destroyed everything we held dear. The artifact was meant to be a weapon, but it became a prison. For centuries it has kept me alive, but it has also forced me to watch my people die. I cannot escape it. But you," she paused, her gaze intense. "You can." Ethan's mind spun with the implications of her words. He had never wanted to be part of a war. He had come here to explore, to learn, not to become involved in ancient battles and power struggles. But as he stood in the chamber, with the artifact's energy humming through him, he realized that he was already part of something far larger than himself. Lyra stepped closer, reaching out to place her hand on his shoulder. "You must decide, Ethan. The artifact is no longer just a tool. It is a key to the Draelix's future, or their destruction. You must choose whether to unlock its true power or to destroy it once and for all." Ethan felt a wave of uncertainty crash over him. How could he make such a decision? He was just a human. He didn't have the knowledge, the experience, the wisdom to understand the consequences of such a choice. And yet he could feel the pull of the artifact calling to him as if it were meant for him to wield. "I don't understand," he said, his voice hoarse. How can I decide? I don't know anything about the Draelix or their war." "You don't have to understand everything," Lyra replied softly. "Sometimes the right path is the one you take without knowing where it leads. Trust yourself, trust the artifact. It will show you the way." The words were both comforting and terrifying. Ethan felt his heart race, his mind struggling to comprehend everything that was happening. But even as he stood there uncertain, he knew that the choice was his. The fate of the Draelix, and possibly the entire galaxy, rested in his hands. And no matter how much he wanted to ignore it, he couldn't escape the responsibility. Lyra's voice broke through his thoughts once again. "You must decide quickly. The Sharon Empire will be here soon. They know the artifact has been activated. They won't stop until they have it." Ethan turned toward the pedestal, the light still pulsing from it like a heartbeat. He had never felt such a weight on his shoulders, but there was no turning back now. The decision wasn't just about the artifact, it was about the future. And with that thought, something clicked inside him. He couldn't let the power of the artifact fall into the wrong hands. Without fully understanding what he was doing, Ethan reached out toward the pedestal, his fingers brushing against its surface. The moment he made contact, a surge of energy shot through him, and the room around him seemed to explode into light. He gasped as the energy coursed through him, feeling as though his very soul was being pulled into the artifact. Visions flooded his mind again. This time they were clearer, sharper. He saw the future, or at least a version of it. He saw the Draelics, once again united, using the power of the artifact to restore their civilization. He saw the Sharon Empire burning in the wake of their own hubris, their power crumbling as the Draelics rose again. But then there was another vision, a darker one. The artifact, its power unchecked, spreading chaos across the galaxy. The Draelics becoming what they had fought so hard against, conquerors, bent on dominating every star system in their reach. The choice wasn't just about saving the Draelics. It was about deciding what kind of future would come from the power of the artifact. Ethan pulled his hand back, his chest heaving as he fought to make sense of what he had just seen. He knew what he had to do. He wasn't just choosing between two sides. He was choosing between the balance of the entire galaxy. The decision was his. "Lyra," he said, his voice trembling with determination, "I know what I have to do, but I can't do this alone." Lyra's gaze softened, and for the first time, Ethan saw a flicker of hope in her eyes. "You are not alone," she whispered. With that, the room fell silent again, the weight of the decision settling over them both. The future of the Draelics, and perhaps the galaxy, rested in their hands. Ethan stood there, heart pounding, as the last remnants of the vision faded away. The glowing energy from the pedestal dimmed, leaving the chamber cloaked in darkness. He felt disoriented, his thoughts swirling with everything he had just witnessed. He had seen two possible futures, one where the Draelics rose again, united and powerful, and another where the artifact's unchecked power consumed everything in its path. He couldn't shake the feeling that the decision he was about to make was more than just a choice between two opposing sides. It was a choice that would shape the galaxy itself. Lyra's voice broke through his thoughts, low and calm. "You've seen the possibilities, Ethan. But now you must decide. The artifact has chosen you, but you still have the power to choose what happens next. Will you use its power for peace or destruction?" Ethan took a deep breath, feeling the weight of her words sink in. Peace or destruction. How could anyone make such a decision? He wasn't a leader, a general, or a politician. He was just a human, a scientist, far from the grand scale of battles and empires. He had never imagined that one day he would hold the fate of an entire species in his hands. But the truth was, the artifact had already chosen him. It had shown him the future, and now it was up to him to act. He knew that if the Draelics were to survive, they needed to overcome their past. The endless cycle of war had to end, or they would destroy themselves. But he also knew that the artifact's power was dangerous. It was too much for anyone to control, even for the most capable of leaders. Ethan stepped back from the pedestal, his mind racing. The quiet hum of the energy seemed to pulse in time with his thoughts. It was as if the artifact was waiting, watching, urging him to make a choice. Lyra was watching him closely, her eyes never leaving his face. He could see the uncertainty in them now, something he hadn't noticed before. She had always been confident, always seemed like she knew exactly what she was doing. But now there was doubt, too. It wasn't just the weight of the artifact's power that was pressing down on her. It was the weight of centuries of history, of her people's struggle for survival. "Ethan," she said again, her voice quiet, "I have waited for this moment for so long. You are the one who can break the cycle, but you must understand, the power of the artifact will change you. It will change everything." He nodded slowly, his mind still processing. He couldn't deny what the artifact was capable of. He had seen it in the visions, the raw, untamed energy that flowed through the galaxy, a force that could either save or destroy. The Draelics had been guarding it for centuries, using its power to survive. But the power came at a cost, one that had trapped them in a never-ending cycle of war. Lyra's voice was softer now, almost pleading. "I know you are afraid, I am too, but I cannot make this choice for you. Only you can decide if the Draelics will live or die." Ethan's mind flashed back to the moments he had spent with Lyra since their first meeting. He had seen her fight with incredible skill, her movements precise and deadly. He had seen the years of battle and hardship in her eyes, the weight of a life lived in constant war. She wasn't just a warrior, she was a survivor carrying the burden of her people's future on her shoulders. But he wasn't like her. He didn't have centuries of experience, centuries of wisdom. He was just a human, thrown into a situation far beyond his understanding. And yet, as he stood there, he felt something stir within him, a sense of purpose, a resolve that he couldn't ignore. "I don't want to make this decision," he said softly, his voice shaking slightly. "I don't want to choose between peace and destruction. I don't want to be the one to wield this power." Lyra's gaze softened, and she stepped closer to him. Her presence was like a steadying force, and for the first time since they had met, Ethan felt a flicker of hope. "You don't have to do it alone," she said quietly. "I am here. I will help you. We will decide together." Ethan looked at her, her face a mixture of resolve and vulnerability. He could see the weight of the centuries in her eyes, the pain of endless struggle. And in that moment, he realized that Lyra wasn't just a guardian of the artifact. She was more than that. She was the last hope for her people, the one who had carried the burden of their survival for so long. And now she was asking for his help. He took a deep breath, feeling the resolve building within him. "All right," he said, his voice steady now. "Let's do this, together." Lyra nodded, a flicker of gratitude in her eyes. She turned back to the pedestal and placed her hand on it once more. The energy flared to life again, the pulse growing stronger, filling the room with a brilliant light. Ethan felt it resonate deep within him, the raw power of the artifact calling to him. It was as if the energy was alive, aware of him, waiting for him to unlock its potential. Lyra spoke again, her voice soft but filled with authority. "We will use the artifact's power to unite the Draelix, but we will not let it consume us. We will learn from the mistakes of the past, and we will rebuild." Ethan stepped forward, placing his hand on the pedestal beside hers. The moment his skin touched the surface, a wave of energy surged through him, unlike anything he had ever felt before. It was like a jolt of electricity, shooting through his body and into his mind. His vision blurred, and the images from the artifact's past flashed before his eyes once again, only this time they were clearer, more detailed. He saw the Draelix at their height, powerful, wise, and peaceful. But he also saw their fall, betrayal, greed, and war that shattered their civilization. He saw the Sharon Empire, relentless in its pursuit of domination, slowly crushing the Draelix beneath its heel. And he saw the artifact, once a symbol of hope, now a weapon of destruction. The vision shifted again, and Ethan saw a new image, a vision of the future. The Draelix united, standing together under a new banner, one forged not in war but in peace. He saw their cities restored, their people flourishing, their culture reborn. And at the center of it all, Lyra and Ethan, standing together, guiding the Draelix into a new age. The vision flickered, and for a moment it seemed to crumble. The power of the artifact surged again, overwhelming Ethan. He gasped, pulling back from the pedestal as the energy threatened to consume him. He stumbled, his body trembling with the force of the power that had just flooded through him. "Ethan!" Lyra shouted, reaching out to steady him. Her touch was firm, grounding him. "Don't fight it. Trust the artifact." Ethan closed his eyes, taking deep, steadying breaths. He had to focus. He had to control it. The artifact wasn't just a tool, it was a catalyst, a force that could change the course of the galaxy, and he had to be the one to wield it responsibly. He opened his eyes, meeting Lyra's gaze. "I'm ready," he said, his voice steady now, filled with determination. Lyra nodded, her expression resolute. Together, they stood before the pedestal, ready to unlock the power of the artifact and guide the Draelix toward a future that would break the cycle of war and destruction. The moment they both placed their hands back on the artifact, a brilliant light erupted from it, flooding the room. The energy surged, filling every corner of the chamber with blinding light. Ethan felt the power of the artifact coursing through him again, but this time it was different. This time he was in control. He could feel the flow of the energy, the balance between destruction and creation, life and death. And with Lyra by his side, he knew they could guide the Draelix to the future they had always deserved. The light faded, leaving them in silence. But the weight of their decision lingered in the air, and the future of the Draelix now rested in their hands. The light from the artifact slowly dimmed, leaving the room in an eerie silence. Ethan stood still, his hand still resting on the pedestal, his body tingling from the immense energy that had surged through him. The vision of the future, of the Draelix united and peaceful, still lingered in his mind. He could feel it deep inside him, the pull of something greater, something he couldn't yet fully understand. But there was no time to reflect. The task ahead was clear. He and Lyra had made their choice. Now they had to make it a reality. Lyra stood beside him, her expression calm but focused, her eyes scanning the darkened chamber around them. She seemed to sense the change in the air, the shift in the very fabric of the world they were standing in. For centuries, she had carried the burden of the Draelix alone, guarding the artifact, but now it was different. Now they had the power to change everything. "This is only the beginning," she said softly, her voice steady but filled with an unspoken weight. "The Sharon Empire will come. They know what we've done. They won't let this power slip from their grasp." Ethan nodded, feeling the weight of her words sink in. They hadn't just made a choice for the Draelix, they had made a choice for the galaxy. The Sharon Empire, a ruthless, expansionist force, would stop at nothing to seize the artifact and control its power. The Draelix were already divided, fragile, and vulnerable. They would need time to heal, to rebuild, but time was something they didn't have. "We have to prepare," Ethan said, his voice more certain now. The decision had been made, and there was no going back. "We need to reach the Draelix people, unite them, and prepare for what's coming." Lyra turned to face him, her eyes meeting his with a strange intensity. "It's not just about the Draelix anymore. The artifact has already changed you, Ethan. I can feel it. You must understand, the power we've unlocked isn't just a weapon. It's a catalyst for something much bigger. The galaxy will be watching. And the choices we make from here on will affect everyone, whether they like it or not." The magnitude of her words hung in the air like a heavy cloud. Ethan's thoughts churned, but he didn't have time to dwell on them. The Draelix needed to be united, and the Sharon Empire needed to be stopped. The future of an entire civilization and the balance of power in the galaxy rested on their shoulders. With a deep breath, Ethan turned to look at the room they had found themselves in. The walls, once dark and oppressive, now seemed to shimmer with new life, a reflection of the power they had just unlocked. But the light didn't feel like it was just from the artifact. It felt like something deeper, something that had always been there, waiting to be awakened. Lyra stepped forward, motioning for Ethan to follow. "There is a place I know," she said. "A safe haven for those loyal to the Draelix cause. It's hidden deep within the ruins of the city, far from the reach of the Sharon Empire. But it won't remain hidden for long. We must move quickly." Ethan nodded, his mind already racing ahead. The Draelix needed to be alerted to the change, to the new possibility for their future. They couldn't just wait for the Sharon to make their move. The artifact had chosen him, but it was Lyra's experience and leadership that they would need now. Together, they could rally the Draelix to their cause. They made their way through the ruins of the ancient city, Lyra leading the way with ease. Her movements were swift, purposeful, each step measured and confident. Ethan followed closely behind, his senses alert but also distracted. The events of the past hours, the power of the artifact, the visions, the choices, had left him with a sense of urgency, but also an unshakable feeling that they were being watched. They reached a narrow alleyway, its entrance hidden behind a dense wall of vines and ancient stone. Lyra stepped forward and with a quick motion moved aside a hidden panel in the stone. The wall shifted, revealing a dark passage that led deep into the earth. "This is where we go," she said, stepping into the darkness. "The others are waiting." Ethan followed her into the passage, feeling the cool air close in around them. The walls of the tunnel were lined with symbols, similar to the ones on the pedestal, glowing faintly in the dark. As they descended, the air seemed to grow heavier, more oppressive, as if the very ground they walked on was holding its breath. After what seemed like hours, they finally reached the bottom. The tunnel opened into a large underground chamber, dimly lit by the same soft glow. Ethan blinked, adjusting to the light, and saw a group of Draelix standing in the center of the room. They were all different ages, different sizes, but all shared the same sharp, regal features. They wore the same intricate armor, now weathered with age, their expressions tense but hopeful. Lyra stepped forward and addressed them, her voice calm but commanding. "We have made a choice," she said, her gaze sweeping over the group. "The artifact is no longer just a relic of the past. It is the key to our future. But that future is not secure. The Sharon Empire will come for us, and we must be ready." The room was silent, all eyes focused on Lyra. Ethan could feel the weight of their attention, but he knew this moment was crucial. They had to believe in the possibility of peace, of unity. They had to understand that the Draelix could change, could rebuild if they were given the chance. Ethan stepped forward, his voice steady. "We are not just fighting for survival anymore. We are fighting for a future where the Draelix are united, not divided. a future where the power of the artifact is used for peace, not destruction. A murmur ran through the group, and Ethan could see doubt in their eyes. The Draelics had fought wars for centuries, and peace must have seemed like a distant dream. But there was something in the way Lyra spoke, in the way she stood beside him, that made him believe they could do it. They had to. One of the Draelic's warriors, a tall, broad-shouldered figure with deep red markings across his face, stepped forward. "What do you ask of us?" he asked, his voice deep and resonant. "You say the artifact is the key, but how can we trust you? We have trusted many in the past, and they have failed us." Lyra's gaze remained unwavering. "I ask for your trust," she said simply. "I have led you for centuries, but this is not just my fight anymore. This is our fight. Together we can unite the Draelics, but we cannot do it alone." Ethan looked around the room, seeing the mix of doubt, fear, and hope in their eyes. They had been broken for so long, caught in a never-ending cycle of war. But now there was a chance, a real chance, that things could be different. "We will rebuild," he said, his voice firm. "But we have to be willing to change. We have to fight not just for survival, but for something greater, for a future where the Draelics stand as one, not divided." The silence in the room was thick, but gradually the warriors began to nod. It wasn't unanimous, not yet. But Ethan could feel the shift, the spark of something new beginning to take hold. They were not ready to lay down their arms, not yet, but they were ready to listen. Lyra turned to Ethan, her expression softening for the first time since they had met. "You're right," she said quietly. "This is our fight now. We have the power to change the future, but we have to be careful. The Sharon Empire will not give up easily. They will come, and they will come with everything they have." Ethan nodded, his mind racing with the enormity of their task. The artifact had given them the power to change everything. But it would take more than just power. It would take trust, unity, and above all, time. The Draelics were not a broken people. They were a people with a future, and they needed to see it. "We'll be ready," Ethan said, his voice steady. "We'll make them believe." The Draelic's warriors stood together, their faces hardening with resolve. They were ready. And so, for the first time, the future seemed possible. Together, they would rebuild the Draelics, and together, they would fight to protect the future they had fought for so long to achieve. The journey ahead would be long, and the road would be filled with challenges. But with the power of the artifact, and with the unity of the Draelics behind them, they had the chance to change everything. And for the first time in centuries, the possibility of peace didn't seem so far out of reach. The days that followed were a blur of activity, and yet they seemed to stretch out endlessly for Ethan. After the meeting in the hidden chamber, the Draelics had started to gather, each bringing their knowledge, skills, and resources. The factions that had been divided for centuries now found common ground in their shared hope for a new beginning. It was a fragile hope, but it was there, and that was enough to fuel their determination. Ethan couldn't help but be in awe of the way Lyra commanded the group. She had always been the warrior, the guardian of the artifact, but now she was something more. She was a leader, a symbol of the Draelics' strength and resilience. And yet, Ethan could see the weight of centuries pressing down on her. She carried the hopes of an entire civilization on her shoulders. They worked tirelessly, preparing for the inevitable assault by the Sharon Empire. The Draelic's warriors trained relentlessly, sharpening their skills and their resolve. Engineers and scientists, once divided by political lines, now collaborated to make use of the artifact's power to strengthen their defenses. But even as they worked, the looming threat of the Sharon Empire cast a shadow over everything. They knew the Empire wouldn't wait long. Ethan spent most of his time with Lyra, strategizing, planning, and learning as much as he could about the Draelic's culture and history. He was no soldier, but he had a sharp mind, and he quickly became an invaluable asset to their cause. The more he learned about the Draelics, the more he understood the depth of their struggle. They weren't just fighting for their survival. They were fighting for the right to exist as a people, to reclaim what had been stolen from them. The artifact's power, once a dangerous force that had torn them apart, was now a beacon of hope. But even as they used its energy to rebuild, Ethan knew the danger it posed. The Sharon Empire would stop at nothing to claim it, and they wouldn't hesitate to destroy anyone who stood in their way. Time was running out, and the Draelics needed to be ready. One evening, as they sat around a fire in the heart of the hidden stronghold, Lyra spoke to Ethan about the past. Her eyes were distant, as though she were reliving moments she had long buried. "It was the artifact that changed everything," she said quietly. Before it, the Draelics were peaceful. We were explorers, scientists, diplomats. We sought knowledge and understanding. But when the Sharon Empire came, they destroyed everything. They took our cities, our people, our way of life, and the artifact, it gave us power. But it also trapped us. It turned us into warriors, and we never found a way out. Ethan looked at her, his heart heavy with the weight of her words. "You've been fighting for so long," he said softly. "I can't imagine what that's been like." Lyra shook her head, her gaze never leaving the fire. "I've lived through more battles than I can count. I've seen the rise and fall of entire civilizations, but this is different. For the first time, I see a way forward, a way to break the cycle." Ethan reached out, placing a hand on her shoulder. "You don't have to do it alone, we'll do this together." Her eyes met his, and for a brief moment he saw something in her, a flicker of hope. It was fleeting, but it was enough to make him believe that perhaps they could succeed. The following days were a blur of preparation. The hidden stronghold was buzzing with activity as the Draelics finished their final preparations. The artifact had been used to forge powerful weapons and shields, but they knew that it wouldn't be enough. The Sharon Empire had the advantage in numbers and resources. The Draelics were outmatched, outnumbered, but they weren't without hope. Ethan spent more time with the warriors now, watching their training, learning their tactics. He didn't think he could ever be a true soldier, but he could be their strategist. He could help them use their strength in ways that would give them an edge. On the eve of the battle, the tension in the air was palpable. They had gathered all their forces, ready to face the Sharon Empire's full might. Ethan stood on a balcony overlooking the vast gathering of Draelic's warriors, their eyes filled with determination. He felt the weight of the moment pressing down on him. This wasn't just a battle for survival, it was a battle for the future of the Draelics, for the future of the galaxy. Lyra joined him, her presence a steadying force. "We're ready," she said, her voice calm despite the storm that was about to unfold. Ethan nodded, but inside he felt the fear gnawing at him. The Sharon Empire was ruthless, and they would stop at nothing to crush any resistance. But they had something the Empire didn't, the power of unity, the power of a people who refused to give up. "We'll fight with everything we have," Ethan said, his voice firm. "We won't let them take our future." The next morning, the battle began. The Sharon Empire's forces were massive, far larger than the Draelics had anticipated. The sky was filled with the roar of starships, and the ground trembled beneath the weight of the Sharon war machines. But the Draelics were ready. They had prepared for this moment for centuries, and now they would stand and fight. The first wave of Sharon forces landed just outside the stronghold's perimeter, and the ground erupted into chaos. Explosions rocked the air as the Draelics launched their counterattacks, their weapons crackling with the energy of the artifact. The Sharon soldiers were powerful, but the Draelics fought with a desperation born from years of struggle. They fought not just for their survival, but for the future they had fought so long to protect. Ethan watched from the command center, his mind working furiously as he directed the Draelics' forces. He wasn't a soldier, but he had learned the art of strategy in these last few weeks. He knew how to use their strengths, how to outmaneuver the Sharon forces, how to turn the tide of battle in their favor. It was working. The Sharon Empire, though large and powerful, was beginning to falter. The Draelics were relentless, and their unity, forged through years of hardship, gave them a strength the Sharon could not match. But even as the Draelics pushed forward, the Sharon Empire revealed its true strength. They unleashed their most powerful weapon, their war machine, a massive behemoth that shook the ground with every step. It was unlike anything the Draelics had seen before, a machine of destruction that seemed invincible. Lyra, leading the charge, saw the threat immediately. She turned to Ethan, her voice tight with urgency. "We need to take it down, now." Ethan nodded, his heart racing. He had no idea how they could defeat something so powerful, but he knew they had to try. He quickly sent out orders, rallying the Draelics' forces for a final, desperate push. The battle raged on as the Draelics' warriors fought their way toward the war machine. Explosions lit up the sky and the ground was littered with debris. But through it all, Ethan saw something incredible. The Draelics were no longer divided. They fought as one, a united force with a singular purpose, to protect their future. The final assault was chaotic and brutal. Lyra and her warriors led the charge, their weapons crackling with the power of the artifact as they fired at the war machine's weak points. The Sharon soldiers fought fiercely, but they couldn't hold back the Dralics. Finally, with a deafening roar, the war machine fell. The Sharon Empire's forces, stunned by the loss of their most powerful weapon, began to retreat. The Dralics had won. The battlefield was silent except for the sounds of the wounded and the distant cries of victory. Ethan stood among the warriors, his heart still racing. They had done it. They had fought and won, but the cost had been high. Many had fallen, and the wounds of war ran deep. But the Dralics had a chance now. A real chance to rebuild, to create the future they had always dreamed of. Lyra stood beside him, her expression unreadable. But there was something in her eyes, something soft, something hopeful. "We did it," Ethan said, his voice filled with awe. "We won." Lyra nodded, her voice quiet but filled with strength. "We did, but the real battle is just beginning. The Sharon Empire will never forget this day. We've shown them that the Dralics will never fall again." Ethan turned to her, his heart swelling with pride. "Then we'll keep fighting, together." And so, as the dust settled and the smoke of battle began to clear, the Dralics stood victorious. Their future, once uncertain, now seemed possible. They had faced their enemies, their past, and their darkest fears, and they had emerged stronger. The road ahead would be long, but they were no longer alone. Together, they would rebuild, and they would never let anyone take their future away again.